When Daniel and Marissa bought their first home, they thought the biggest surprise would be the overgrown backyard or the creaking floors. But tucked away behind a wall of hedges, they found something the realtor never mentioned: a forgotten hot tub, sealed and rotting, as if someone had tried to bury its existence. From the very first night, it became clear that this was no ordinary relic. The water inside wasn't just dirty. It was alive, and it wasn't waiting to be cleaned, it was waiting to be fed. The first time I noticed the hot tub, it was less of a discovery and more of a slow realization, as if it had always been there in the far corner of the backyard, waiting for me to turn my head. It wasn't something you'd call inviting. The hedges around it had grown tall and thick, shielding it from view unless you walked to the very edge of the property. The wooden deck beneath it sagged with age, warped by years of neglect. The cover itself was stiff and caked with grime, streaked with mold that left green and black scars across its faded surface. I should have left it alone, treated it like a piece of junk that didn't belong to me, but instead I found myself circling it like prey, circling a predator, unable to look away. When I finally lifted the heavy cover, the stench rolled out in a wave. It was the smell of something left damp for too long, metallic and earthy, like rust mixed with rot. The water beneath was dark and cloudy, tinted in shades of brown and green that swirled together like smoke trapped in liquid. A thick film floated across the top, broken here and there by bubbles that popped soundlessly, releasing faint puffs of that iron smell. I wrinkled my nose and pulled back, but even as disgust curled in my stomach, a different sensation stirred deeper inside me. A strange curiosity. It wasn't normal, it wasn't right, and yet I couldn't shake the thought that there was something alive under the surface. I told myself it was just a leftover mess from the previous owners, nothing more. People abandon things all the time when they move. A hot tub, especially one this old, wasn't unusual to leave behind. I tried to convince myself that it was just another piece of junk I'd have to deal with, but there was a tightness in my chest as I walked away that I couldn't explain. It felt like I was being pulled backward, like invisible eyes clung to me even as I turned my back. That night, I went to bed with the image of that dark water burned into my thoughts. The sound of those faint bubbles popping wouldn't leave my ears. And long after I should have fallen asleep, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling that smell still lingering in my nose. When I finally drifted into restless dreams, they were filled with water. Not clear, peaceful water, but thick, heavy liquid that clung to my skin and dragged me down. I dreamed of floating weightlessly in a black current, sinking deeper and deeper while pale shapes drifted past me, their limbs slack, their faces blurred. I woke with my throat raw and my body damp with sweat, the sensation of drowning still clawing at me. As I sat up, I swore I could hear faint bubbling outside my window, as though the hot tub had come alive in the dark. The following morning I tried to laugh it off. It was just a tub, just water and pipes and mildew. My brain was making something out of nothing, feeding me cheap scares because I'd let myself get too wound up. Still, I couldn't resist going back outside, telling myself I'd check again in the daylight, just to prove there was nothing strange about it. The hedges whispered as I brushed past them, the leaves slick with dew. And there it was, again the hot tub, waiting silently in its corner. The cover looked heavier than before, like it had soaked up the night air and grown bloated with damp. I didn't want to touch it, but I forced myself forward. My fingers pressed into the cracked vinyl, and as I lifted, the hinges groaned like a voice complaining in pain. The stench was even stronger this time, and the water was worse than I remembered, cloudier, darker, as though something had stirred overnight. I bent closer, squinting at the surface, and froze. The reflection staring up at me didn't move when I did. My eyes blinked, but the ones in the water stayed open, unblinking, locked on me with a cold stillness that made my stomach drop. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My body locked in place, waiting for it to vanish, waiting for the surface to break and ripple so I could tell myself it was a trick of the light. But it didn't. It just kept staring. And then, just as the first ripple broke across the surface, I heard it again, the faint sound of bubbling. Only this time it was coming from deep inside the tub, not from the pipes, not from the surface, but from something moving far beneath the water. Cleaning the tub became less of a choice and more of a compulsion. I told myself it was about reclaiming the space, about not letting something so foul linger at the edge of my yard, but deep down I knew it was something else. There was a strange draw to it, a pressure I couldn't name that made me return again and again. Each morning, before work, I would walk past the hedges, almost against my will, and lift the cover. The smell greeted me like a loyal friend, sharp and metallic, filling my lungs until my throat burned. The water never looked the same twice. Some days it was murky brown, other days tinged with a greenish glow as if some unseen light passed through it. But the worst part wasn't the color or the stink, it was the way the water always seemed to cloud itself back over no matter what I did. The first attempt was simple. Buckets of bleach poured in until the fumes stung my eyes and watered them. For a brief moment, the surface cleared, and I thought I'd won. The reflection of the sky broke through, blue and cloudless, and I felt a swell of relief. But when I came back that evening, the water was darker than ever, the film twice as thick, as though it had swallowed the bleach whole and transformed it into something more foul. Draining it was worse. I set up a pump, listened as the hose gurgled with the slow pull of liquid. The sound didn't match what I expected. It wasn't the simple sucking noise of water being emptied, but a deep, hollow echo, like air moving through a cavernous space. At one point, the hose trembled in my hands, vibrating with such force that I almost dropped it, as if something inside the water resisted leaving. I kept going until finally the tub was empty, and the bottom revealed itself. That should have been the end of it, but what I saw at the bottom ensured I couldn't just walk away. There were things tangled in the muck, things that shouldn't have been there. Clumps of hair clung to the drain, long strands knotted together, slick with slime. I pulled at them with a stick, only to uncover fingernails fresh-looking, still curved with the pink of flesh, not the brittle yellow of something aged. I gagged but couldn't stop, my mind screaming to leave even as my hands kept prodding the sludge. A small toy car, rusted but unmistakably modern, lay lodged in a corner, its wheels frozen with grime. I didn't own toys. I didn't know any children. I stood there trembling, staring at the mess. None of it made sense. The logical part of me wanted to believe it had been dumped there by the previous owners, forgotten beneath the water for years. But the nails looked too new, the hair too real. I backed away, dropping the stick, wiping my palms on my jeans as if they were coated in filth I couldn't see. I should have sealed it shut, filled it with dirt, turned it into nothing more than a planter for weeds, yet instead I filled it again. Maybe it was arrogance, maybe fear. Maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't going insane, that it was just a broken old tub with bad plumbing and rotted debris. I dragged the hose across the yard, watched as the water rose inch by inch, the sunlight catching on the ripples. For a brief moment, it looked normal, clean, harmless. I leaned over to test the warmth with my hand, convincing myself I had fixed it. That's when I saw it again, my reflection. It was wrong. My face looked back at me, but the eyes were off, glassy and unblinking, the skin too pale, the mouth curled upward in the faintest trace of a grin I hadn't made. I jerked back, stumbling onto the deck, heart hammering. The water rippled slightly, breaking the image, and for a second I thought it was gone. But just before the surface stilled again, I saw the reflection blink on its own. That night, as I lay in bed, I kept replaying the moment. I tried to rationalize it till my eyes were tired. The light had shifted. It was just my brain misfiring, but none of those excuses could drown out the memory of that smile. When I finally closed my eyes, I dreamed of the bottom of the tub again, only this time the clumps of hair writhed like snakes. The fingernails scratched at the sides, and the toy car rolled slowly across the muck as if pushed by small, unseen hands. When I woke, the air in my room smelled faintly of chlorine and rust, though the windows were closed. And outside, beneath the silence of dawn, I thought I heard the sound of bubbling again, soft and steady, like breathing through water. I told myself I was done with the hot tub, but that was a lie I couldn't hold on to for long. The more I tried to ignore it, the stronger the pull became. It sat in the corner of the yard like a presence that knew my name, waiting for me to return. I'd catch myself staring out the window, eyes drifting past the hedges, wondering if the water looked different that day. At night, I heard the faint hum of bubbling, as though the jets had come alive again, even though I had never touched the controls. It felt like the tub was calling to me, whispering in a language too deep for words, and I was helpless to resist. One evening, exhaustion took away my fear. I had spent hours convincing myself that nothing was wrong, that all the strange sights and smells were just my imagination, amplified by stress. I poured myself a drink, stood by the sliding glass door, and stared at the steaming water. The sight of it didn't frighten me anymore. Instead, it looked almost inviting. The surface glowed faintly under the porch light, the steam curling upward like soft hands beckoning me closer. My body moved before my brain had time to argue. I walked outside, lifted the cover, and climbed in. The heat wrapped around me instantly. It was soothing in a way I hadn't felt in years. A heavy embrace that melted my muscles and pulled the breath from my chest in long, satisfied sighs. I leaned back against the edge, closing my eyes, trying to let go of everything that had haunted me since I'd found it. For a few minutes it worked. The jets kicked on, massaging my back, sending warm pulses through my body. I almost laughed at myself for being so afraid of this, for letting shadows in dirty water ruin my peace. But the longer I sat there, the heavier the water felt. It clung to my skin, pressing down instead of lifting me. My limbs began to ache, not with relaxation but with strain, as though the heat was boiling my strength away. I shifted uncomfortably, and that's when I noticed the ripples. The jets were on, but the patterns on the surface weren't natural. They moved in steady waves, forming shapes that looked too much like hands pressing upward from below. I sat up straighter, trying to shake the thought, but the ripples didn't stop. Then something brushed against my ankle. At first I thought it was the suction vent pulling at me, but the touch was too soft, too deliberate. It wrapped lightly, almost tenderly, around my leg. My heart leaped into my throat. I jerked upward, splashing water everywhere, but the hold tightened. It wasn't mechanical. It was something cold and smooth, curling slowly, like fingers testing the weight of their grip. I kicked hard, water sloshing against the sides, and the pressure released. I scrambled out of the tub, slipping on the slick deck, gasping as steam rose around me in thick clouds. I backed away, staring at the surface. The water had stilled, innocent and calm, as though nothing had happened. My breath came in ragged bursts, each exhale puffing white in the cool night air. I told myself it had to be my imagination, that the suction had caught me, nothing more. But then I saw the trail of wet footprints leading away from the tub. They weren't mine. They were smaller, lighter, and they walked in a neat line across the deck, dripping steadily as though someone had climbed out just moments before me. My eyes followed the trail as it curved, leading toward the house. I froze, every muscle locked, the world narrowing to that single line of water glistening in the porch light. I wanted to run inside, to slam the doors and hide under the covers, but I couldn't make my legs move. The night was silent, except for the faint drip of water hitting the wood, each drop louder than the last. Finally, I forced myself forward, following the footprints even though dread coiled in my stomach. They stopped just at the threshold of the sliding glass door, vanishing as though whoever had made them had stepped inside. My heart pounded against my ribs as I looked through the glass. The house was dark, still, and empty. At least, it looked that way. I couldn't see anyone standing there. But pressed against the inside of the glass, faint but unmistakable, was a handprint. Small, wet, and fresh. After that night, the house no longer felt like my own. The warmth I had once felt inside its walls was gone, replaced by a damp chill that seeped into everything. My carpet squished under my feet as though water had soaked into the fibers, and beads of moisture formed on the windows even when the air outside was dry. No matter how many times I ran a dehumidifier, the smell of chlorine and rust clung stubbornly to every room, heavy and suffocating, like the air of an old public pool left to rot. At first I thought it was just my paranoia leaking into reality. I had let the hot tub consume my thoughts so thoroughly that I must have been imagining the changes around me. But then the puddles appeared. Small at first, spreading across the floorboards in the hall, damp circles that grew larger each day. I cleaned them up, laid towels down, but in the morning they always returned, darker and deeper, seeping through the cracks in the wood. When I pressed my hand against the floor, it felt cool and slick, as if something below was pushing the water upward. Sleep became impossible. Every night I woke to the sound of splashing, faint at first, like a child playing in shallow water. I would lie still in the darkness, straining to hear, my heart pounding as the sound grew louder. The splashes weren't random. They had rhythm, almost like footsteps pacing through water. Sometimes I swore I could hear the faintest echo of breathing, gurgling and wet, drifting up from beneath the floorboards. Each time I checked the hot tub outside, the surface was still and flat, black as oil, reflecting nothing but shadows. I needed proof. If my mind was breaking, I had to know. I bought a cheap security camera and set it up on the porch, aimed directly at the tub. That night, I sat in bed, forcing myself to stay awake as long as I could, though exhaustion clawed at my eyes. At some point, sleep took me, but when I woke the next morning, the camera's red light was still on, blinking steadily. My hands shook as I loaded the footage. The first few hours were uneventful. The tub sat in silence, steam rising faintly under the moonlight. But around 2 in the morning, the water stirred. At first it was subtle, ripples spreading slowly across the surface without any wind to cause them. Then bubbles began to rise, dozens of them, bursting silently, sending mist curling into the air. Pale shapes appeared beneath the water, just barely visible, pressing against the surface like faces straining to break through. I watched in frozen terror as thin, colorless hands clawed up the sides of the tub, slipping, grabbing, vanishing again, as though the water itself refused to release them. I could hardly breathe. I wanted to shut off the footage, but I couldn't look away. The hands kept coming, reaching higher, pulling at the edges. And then, suddenly, I was there, on the screen, sound asleep in the tub. My head rested against the edge. My body relaxed as though I had been resting there for hours, but I hadn't. I had been in bed. I remembered tossing and turning, sweating through my sheets, not once stepping outside. And yet, on the video I was floating, drifting gently as the pale hand stroked my arms, brushed across my face, tugged lightly at my hair. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. The image seared into my mind, impossible to explain. I wanted to run, to leave everything behind and never look back, but my body refused to obey. My legs felt heavy, my chest tight, as if invisible arms had already wrapped around me, holding me in place. For the rest of the day, I kept glancing out the window, expecting to see myself still sitting there in the water. That night, when I closed my eyes, I dreamed of the tub again. I was floating on the surface, staring upward at the sky, but when I tried to move, I couldn't. My body was pinned, dozens of cold hands gripping me from below. My mouth opened to scream, but water surged in, filling my lungs until everything burned. When I jerked awake, gasping for air, my sheets were drenched, the mattress soaked through as though I had just climbed out of the water. On the floor, beside the bed, a trail of wet footprints led from the door, straight toward me, and at the end of them, pressed against the edge of the mattress, was the clear imprint of a small, dripping hand. I told myself I wouldn't go near the hot tub again, but my promises meant nothing. It was no longer about choice. I would find myself drifting toward it without realizing, my feet carrying me outside in the middle of the night, my mind fogged and sluggish as though I was sleepwalking. Each time the cover was already off, steam curling lazily into the cool air, waiting for me. I never remembered pulling the cover back, but it was always open, the water glistening under the faint glow of the porch light like an eye staring upward. One night I woke standing at the edge, toes just inches from the black surface. The air was damp and heavy, the smell of chlorine thick enough to sting my nostrils. My reflection stared up at me, but it wasn't my face. It was too pale, the skin waxy and stretched thin across sharp cheekbones, its lips twisted into a smile I couldn't mimic, teeth faintly visible in the dark. I staggered back, but the ground tilted beneath me, my legs numb. The steam rose higher, curling around my body like arms, urging me forward. And then I fell in. The water was hotter than before, searing at first, then smothering. My scream was swallowed instantly, bubbles rushing to the surface as I thrashed, but the water didn't feel like water. It clung to me, thick and heavy, dragging me down no matter how hard I kicked. I opened my eyes, and what I saw made me wish I hadn't. There was no bottom. The tub had become an endless pit, stretching into blackness deeper than any ocean. Shapes drifted below me, pale figures suspended in the gloom, their hair floating upward in slow motion. As I sank, I realized they were bodies, dozens of them. Their eyes were wide open, their mouths frozen in silent screams. Their arms reached upward as though begging me to join them. Some were children, their small fingers curling and uncurling in the dark. Others were older, faces twisted by years of drowning, skin gray and wrinkled. They hovered in silence, waiting, and every one of them was turned toward me. I tried to swim upward, but the water tightened around me like a fist. My chest burned, my vision blurred. One of the figures floated closer, and the dim light revealed a face I recognized. I had seen it before in old clippings about the house, one of the missing people whose disappearance had never been solved. Another face drifted past, then another, all of them familiar from the blurred photos I had once brushed off as tragedies of strangers. They weren't strangers anymore. They were here, trapped, and they wanted me with them. The hands reached out, brushing against my arms, my legs, my hair. Their touch was cold, almost gentle. But when I tried to pull away, they tightened, dragging me deeper. My chest convulsed, desperate for air, and I knew I wouldn't last. Just before I gave in, I saw one final shape drifting through the water. It was me. My own face floated in the black, eyes open, lips curled in that same faint smile I'd seen reflected before. My body swayed gently, hair waving like seaweed, skin pale and lifeless. I stared at myself, unable to look away, and in that moment I knew what the hot tub truly was. It wasn't just broken machinery or stagnant water. It was a mouth, a throat, a grave that swallowed what it wanted and held on forever. The last of my air escaped me, and the water rushed in, filling my lungs. The world went dark. I woke in my bed, drenched in sweat, coughing so hard I thought my ribs would snap. My sheets were soaked, the air thick with the smell of chlorine and rust. For a moment, I convinced myself it had been another nightmare, a vivid hallucination born of fear and exhaustion. But when I sat up, I froze. The hot tub cover was lying on the floor at the foot of my bed, dripping steadily onto the carpet, and pressed into the wet fabric of the sheets. Inches from where my head had been was the clear imprint of my own hand, cold, pale, and wrinkled as though it had been under water far too long.